Lord, in your name I'm not afraid. You have been my hope when fears were far beyond my understanding.
I really wish that I could be there, here, there. This coming Wednesday night for the Christmas caroling. I can't. Perhaps you can. I would encourage you. I wish I could come, but I can't. But maybe you can. I think there's going to be a lot of fun, exciting, wonderful things happening on this campus in the months and years ahead. I see a lot of beautiful things beginning and going out in the neighborhood, singing songs, Christmas caroling, bundling up. What a blessing. So if you can possibly make it, you won't see me because I can't be here, but I would encourage you to. Does that sound hypocritical? I can't be here, but you should? Not you should, but I think you'll be blessed. I really, there are so many blessings that I can't partake of, but you do what you can. But we can all open our Bibles to John chapter 1. That's where we're at right now. And John is a poet, an artist, certainly the Holy Spirit, the source of all art and beauty. And John's gospel paints a picture to me more vivid, more clear than any of the other gospel writers. Certainly the capstone to so much. And here in John chapter 2, we have a picture of the Father's heart. And then the Father's house. The house of God. What does that sound like? What does that seem like? What does that feel like to you? The house of God, does that seem like something cold? No. If you already have the answers, don't say it. Because I got nothing left to say. It is heavenly, but for a lot of folks, the house of God is something cold and hard and formal. It's a place that has to be easy to clean because you got to be clean to be there. It's a place that you can wipe down, wash off, sanitize, kind of like a surgery center or an operating room. That's often the idea when you think of the house of God. Holy, 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 holy cow. Who could live there? Who could be worthy to be there to begin with? And then who wants to live in a place like that? Where's the love? Where are the cushions? Where's the soft plush pillows? Where are the things that are soft to touch but kind of hard to clean? In my case, where's the dog hair? If there's not some dog hair somewhere around, where's man's best friend? Where's the Father's house? For me, shouldn't be like many people think of when they consider the temple of the Lord or the house of the Lord. For myself, I was brought up in religion. I was brought up at St. Boniface down in Anaheim. I was literally brought up there. I was almost born there. I didn't just go there on Sunday. I went to school there. All my brothers went to school there. Is the first thing I remember. I wasn't quite born there, but I was baptized there as a baby. I cut my teeth there on the back of the pews when my mom would sit me in there, and I was a pretty good kid. I didn't cry a lot, so I didn't have to go to the cry room, and I could be there in the pew and turn around and look at the people in back and make faces and then as I grew up a little bit more, I learned to kneel on the hard kneelers, because at that time there were no cushions on the kneelers. You had to learn to love God, which means your knees are miserable on those hard kneelers. And then now my face went on the back side of the back of the pew and rested my head there. And then I grew a little older, and I learned to lean on the marble pillars, cold and hard, but they'd hold you up, because as a teenager, I always wanted to be toward the back because that's where my buddies were. And there was a certain time when your parents wouldn't see you sneak out, because you finally fulfilled the obligation, the Eucharist had taken place, and now you could go and still get credits before God that I have been to the church. It was called the house of God, but it never felt like home for me. That was my upbringing, and a lot of people are still kind of in that place. Certainly the Jews were at the time when Jesus visited the temple. And he's trying to teach them something about what the house of God really is. Back in the book of Genesis, in the book of beginnings, There's a story of Jacob. And Jacob, later his name was changed to Israel. But in that story, Jacob is running away from home because he's practically ruined everything that a home is supposed to be about. He's deceived his father. He's stolen the family blessing from his brother, as though a family blessing could be stolen. He felt that he did steal the family blessing. And then at the advice of his mother, you better not just leave the house, you better leave the country. You better get out because your brother is going to come and kill you. This was the house of Jacob. This was the house of Israel. This was the house of Isaac to begin with. Not a lot of laughter, but a whole lot of craziness. Here's Jacob on the run. No doubt miserable. And in that story, he lays down. The softest thing he can find for a pillow is a rock. And he has a dream. And he dreams of a ladder between heaven and earth. And angels, messengers are going back and forth. And he wakes up from that dream and he says, this is Bethel. This is the house of God out this, seemingly God-forsaken place in the wilderness. This is, in fact, the house of God because I had this dream about this connection with the Father himself, the connection with God. And so he named that place Bethel, and it became, Bethel, house of God. It became another place, a holy place. But the fact is, it wasn't the place. It was a connection that he had there, even though it was only a dream. He got a little bit of insight into what the house of God is. It's a connection between God and the place where we presently live. And even though his family was a mess, and even though he was a big part of making that family a total mess, he was told there is a home. There is a place that God himself has made for you. And all of this we saw in John chapter 1. When Jesus said the things kind of like we sang earlier, he said finally, the seventh saying, last line of John chapter 1, truly, truly, I say to you, you shall see the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Jesus said, I'm the ladder. He said to Nathanael, behold, here comes Jacob, he's an Israelite indeed. There's no Jacob, there's no guile, there's no deceit in this guy. You're going to see that ladder. And Jesus said, it's not a place, it's a person. I am that ladder. So then we moved into chapter 2, and you first have to taste, like we saw in Psalms 34. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Jesus said, you will see the Son of Man, but you have to taste in order to see. And so the first sign was the turning of water into wine there at Cana. The first sign was the taste, so that now the first scene, when we see Jesus coming into the temple, now you can see. Now you can see what that scene is about because you first of all have tasted the heart of the Father. So generous, so loving, so good. Those are the big pictures that prepare us to study the actual letters and the next few sentences. It says there in chapter 2, verse 12, that after this, after the Father's heart was displayed in that first of the signs, after this he went down to Capernaum, Jesus and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and there they stayed a few days. You see, he's growing a family, a new family, not just a family born of blood like his mother and brothers, but now born of water, born of the Spirit. Now something more, his disciples are part. He's forming a new family, and he takes that growing family to his Father's house. And it says there in verse 13 that the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, whenever John talks about the Jews, of course, they were all Jews. Jesus was a Jew. Everybody in the whole book, in this whole section, everybody's a Jew pretty much, unless it says otherwise. But when John talks about the Jews, he's talking about the folks who really took their sense of security and sense of identity from the fact that they were the religious ones. They were the Jews. And he's typically talking about the religious leaders, oftentimes the Pharisaical sort, the very ones that eventually would want to see Jesus crucified. They'd want to see him gotten out of the way because they were vested in this whole system. They were vested in the system of the Jews, and when it came to Passover, that was the highest pinnacle of all if you were a religious Jew. All of the religious calendar, all the holy days for the Jews, none of them would have any meaning unless there was, first of all, the Passover, because that's the birthday. That's the beginning. It's only after they come out of Egypt and then all the other feasts, all the other holy days follow. But the birthday of Judaism, the holiest day of all, is the birthday, the Passover. And you know the story. I need an editor. I could go on and on and on. But everything, it all links together. The Passover lamb, Jesus is the Passover lamb. Of course, all of the Old Testament symbolism pointing to a person. But Jesus brings this new growing family to his Father's house, and here it is, the highest of the holy days. And bearing in mind what happened there when they crossed out of Egypt, remember again what happened. They entered into Egypt as a dysfunctional family. It was that family of Jacob who had the dream about the house of God, about the ladder. And then later he had a family of his own, and it was even wackier. You know, here's a guy who did what he did, and now when he has a family, the Bible is not filled with stories of perfect families by any means. They're messed up so often. And so they went in as a dysfunctional family. Go back and read the stories if you don't believe me. They went in as a dysfunctional family. They were there a few hundred years, and they came out as a religious franchise. They came out now as the Jews. They went through the Passover. Now we are the Jews, and then, of course, poor Moses has to deal with them in the stories that follow. But this is their birthday. And Jesus comes up to the Father's house in Jerusalem, because that was the highest city, that was the temple, that was the corporate headquarters for the religious franchise. If you were really into Judaism, if your identity and your sense of security was Judaism, here is corporate headquarters. Here's where the whole machinery, where the whole thing works, the temple in Jerusalem. That's how they would have seen it. They wouldn't have said it that way. No. They never would have said it. But that's in fact the way it was working. Jesus, on the other hand, growing a true family. Some of them are flesh and blood, like his mother and brother. Some of them are recently found, like we see in chapter 1. But this is the family built in love, the love of Jesus that Jesus has for all of them. And he takes them up to this place, and for him, it's supposed to be a picture of the Father's house, and it ought to be a very different picture than the one that they were working. But when he came there to corporate headquarters for the Jewish franchise, he saw what he knew he would see. It says in verse 14, he found in the temple, in the house of God in Bethel, he found there in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated. And this was a whole system. I'm trying to edit my words even as I'm standing here. But it was a system. A sacrificial system. You had to have animals that were pure animals, and since the guys who inspected the animals wanted to maybe make it easier, who knows exactly why, they said, rather than you bring an animal and we have to inspect it, we will just grow the animals right here and give you the ones we know are already good, kind of like Costco and the chickens that have been grown to size and then thrown in the rotisserie, and they put them in the back of the place because now you got to walk past everything else before you go get this. It has nothing to do with it. Although that's really smart marketing. That's genius, the way they do things like that. This was the genius of religion at that time. We will give you holy oxen, holy whatever you need. We will raise them. We will certify them. You don't have to mess with trying to get the best ones from your farm and bring them here. Just come here. We will give a fair exchange. Your money may have Roman symbols on it. That's tainted money. We won't accept it. But we will exchange it. We'll give you holy money for your lousy money. We're good like that. It's kind of like the ones that sell you gold on the radio. They'll say, give us your lousy greenbacks and we will give you gold because it's worth so much more. I don't mean, see, that's why I need the editor. I guess I'm just saying it because the games never stop, the scams, the thing. But and I'm not saying that these people are cheats. I don't think these people were cheats. It's just the way the marketplace works. But the Father's house was never supposed to be a marketplace. So these people are doing what they did. This isn't the first time Jesus went there. This isn't like Jesus was shocked. He came in there and went, "Oh, what are you doing?" He'd been there many times before. He knew that's what they did. But what's different is that his public ministry has begun. He's been baptized by John the Baptist. He's gone out into the wilderness. His public ministry has begun, and now at the beginning, he makes a public scene, which is not like Jesus. He normally didn't do that. In fact, quite the contrary. Usually his tendency was to do nothing like this. We're told in Matthew's gospel, quoting from Isaiah, "Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles." He won't quarrel. He won't cry out. His voice won't be heard in the streets. A battered reed he will not break off. A smoldering wick he will not put out, until he leads justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. So there, that passage that says, look, this is not typical of Jesus. It's not like he was ticked off. He came in there, he was shocked, he saw something going on. He usually would not make a public scene, but he does it here. And it's very purposeful. It's very intentional. That's why I made the point that you won't get the point if you don't taste the first sign. You won't see the first scene. You'll think he's just angry and shocked. Oh no, his heart, the heart of the Father, is turning water to wine. He wants to make something wonderful and overflowing and free and gracious and beautiful. That's his heart. But when he walks into this house, it needs to be seen that this is not at all reflective of what the Father's house is all about. So what he does here is really atypical for Jesus. Usually he was low-key in everything he did. But right now, the beginning of his public ministry, he makes a public scene. He does it one more time at the very end of his ministry. And the very fact that he could do it is a miracle, because they had guards. They had strong arm there to protect that place. So for him to do what he did, that in itself was a type of miracle, but not the typical miracle that Jesus would do. Not like the subtle thing where he turned water to wine and no one even knew that it happened except the servants and the disciples. So here he is making a scene, but only because it's so important. This is very intentional, very purposeful in what takes place. It says that he made a scourge of cords, or he wove or braided a scourge of cords, took littler cords and made a broader one. I think most of you kind of have the idea, the picture of that. And the point is simply, it takes time. It's not so that you can get a better whip so you can make people hurt, so they'd sting a lot longer once you hit them with it. It's a picture painted that when he saw this, again, everyone knew they did this. Everyone knew this business was going on. Most people thought it was fair. It was like, hey, pretty convenient. I don't have to raise my own bull, my perfect bull. I just give a certain amount of money. They give me a perfect bull. We sacrifice it. I get closer to God. Everyone knew about the system. But when he comes in, he wants to publicly show that system is not the way it works. So he takes the time. The picture is of something purposeful and intentional. He takes smaller cords and he weaves the other, just to be sure that you understand that this is an act of passion. This is important. He's fired up, but he's not ticked off. He's not reactive. He's not just, and I point that out again because so many folks who are reactive and who are iconoclastic, angry, religious people have done so many dumb things through history, and they point to Jesus and say, Jesus did it. And no, until you have the heart of Jesus, until you know the heart of Jesus, you have no clue what he's really trying to demonstrate. Passion, to be sure, but very purposeful in what he does. He comes in, doesn't just get upset, doesn't just grab the first thing at hand, just like, doesn't grab a chicken and start swinging it around and hitting people over the head with it, just flying off the handle. No, he comes in, something known to be the case, and he takes the time, and John records that very intentionally, very purposeful, he did what he did. He made a scourge of cords, and he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers, and he overturned their tables. And so again, clear that his purpose, as far as the picture goes, he was passionate. What he did was not just move aside, but to drive them out. You may have in your mind, it's natural to have in your mind, pictures of how he drove them out. He made a scourge. You may see him whipping these animals, but it doesn't say that he did. So if you're an animal lover like I am, if you're worried that, Jesus is being cruel, it doesn't say that specifically. The picture is actually pretty clear. He wanted them out, completely out. And when it came to the money changers, he didn't pocket any of the money. He didn't say, I could make better usage of this. He turned it over, didn't take any away. He turned over the tables, didn't just clear the tables so we can set up a whole nother game. No, gaming is over. No more board games. That's not the way you approach the Father. We're not just clearing the tables so we can set up a new system. As again, historically, people get so angry because they were so wrong, and now we destroy their temples and destroy their religious system, and we set up our own temples and our own religious system. No, all that has got to go. The table's completely turned over. All this stuff has to be gotten out of the way. His purpose was to display that he's passionate about this. He's purposeful about it. And what he wants to do is to have permanence. I'm going to make a picture of what is supposed to be always. And it says, that verse 16, to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. To those selling the doves, it doesn't say he drove the doves out. It doesn't say he whipped the doves. It doesn't say he opened the cages and let them fly away. Even to that fine extent. The bigger animals were driven out. But the doves, he said to the folks who owned them, take them out of here. And so again, the picture is he destroys nothing. He takes nothing away in terms of no one lost any property. You can pick up your coins again. You can take your doves and go. You can get your animals as you leave the building. He destroys, he whips no one. But he does make clear, this is the wrong picture. He says, stop making my Father's house a marketplace. The Greek word is emporium, from which we get emporium. It's a marketplace. Now, later, when he does this at the very end of his ministry, he says, it's your house, and it's left to you desolate. It's no longer my Father's house. But at the very beginning, he's trying to show us the picture of what the Father's house is supposed to be. But again, you won't get this picture about the Father's house unless you go back to the first sign about the Father's heart. That's why I keep repeating that, because it's not enough to just read further and read faster. Make sure that you see how it all connects. Because even the disciples who witnessed this, they didn't get it at first. They saw his passion, but they didn't understand the significance of it. He says, look, this is not supposed to be a marketplace. He's not saying that somebody is ripping somebody else off. He's not saying that, look, your rate of exchange is not a fair rate of exchange. He's not saying you're defrauding people. I mean, he would talk about that later, about these people who, for their long prayers, they would empty the piggy banks of widows because give me your money and I'll give you my prayers. It's not that they didn't do things like that. It's just that right here, that's not the point. He's not trying to set up a better religious business. He's not trying to set up a fair rate of exchange when you come into what is called the house of God. He's trying to make it clear, this is my Father's house. It's not a marketplace. It works in an entirely different way. And again, if you had tasted the first sign, then you would have seen that the Lord is good and had some kind of a notion, what would the Father's house look like? If the Father's house is the one who would quietly make 150 gallons of wine without looking for any recognition, just to enable the people to be happy and stay maybe days longer at this feast, if that's the Father's house or Father's heart, what would you guess would happen in the Father's house? Would there be careful exchange in terms of what's fair and game playing when in fact he did what he did in the first sign? How much did Jesus charge for that wine that he made in the first scene? How much was it worth? The guy who tasted it and was the expert said, you saved the best. He said to the guy, no one even knew Jesus made it except the servants. He said, you saved the best. So what's it worth? I mean, wine can be pretty pricey. But even $2 Chuck, even something this isn't the best. Jesus charged nothing for it. In fact, Jesus didn't even seek recognition. He just gave. What would have been fair trade? What would have been a fair price? In other words, if you get that idea, you'd expect that when we get to the Father's house, if that's his heart, this whole idea of religious exchange, this whole idea of quid pro quo, you ever heard that one before? That's Latin, but this whole idea, I give you this, you give me that, even if it's fair trade, even if it's good business, it has no business in my Father's house, because here's a place where the love flows freely. Here's a place where I'm not even looking to be applauded or seen as the one who is the gracious giver at this feast. That's supposed to be the picture. The Father's house, that's home. Virginia nailed it heavenly. Absolutely. But how few realize. And then to know that the Father's heart and the Father's house is never far away. He comes to you in a person. He comes to you and says, come to me if you're weary and heavy laden. The Father's house is home. And home is the place where you know you are always wanted. You are always loved, no matter what. You are wanted. You are loved because this is your Father's house. And certainly at the wedding feast, Jesus made it very clear, without standing up and giving a speech, he made it very clear in the most subtle way. Everybody here is wanted. I want you all to stay. I don't want anyone leaving early. I don't want anyone leaving disappointed. You're all welcome to be here. You're all wanted to be here a little longer. It wasn't, you've already drunk too much. Sorry, none for you. It was free enough that people could do dumb things. That's kind of the world he's made. Free and open, and you can be foolish. But still, he is free and he is open. And he says, you're wanted. You're welcomed. This is a place where you can be. As I was thinking about this morning, I remembered lyrics from an old Keith Green song where he says, my eyes are dry, my faith is old, my heart is hard, my prayers are cold. And I know how I ought to be alive to you and dead to me, but what can be done for an old heart like mine? Soften it up with oil and wine. The oil is you, your spirit of love. Please wash me anew in the wine of your blood. And I thought, you know what? Keith nailed it on that one. Because that's what Israel was at that time. Dry, old, hard, cold. And Jesus was introducing something that really was the Father's heart. The Father's house is a place where you know you're wanted, where you know you're loved. That doesn't mean it's a place that has no rules. Of course it has rules. But before any other rules in the Father's house, you have to know that love rules. Love rules over every other rule. And as I mentioned last week, Jesus is the third brother in that story of the prodigal son. He's the brother telling the story and reaching out to his brothers, both the religious and the rebellious, saying, come home. For whatever reason you have for staying away, it's not a good reason. Come home. That's the picture. Come home. And Jesus says this picture of you selling stuff, even if you're selling it at a fair price, even if you're making it easier for people to do their sacrifice, you're messing up the picture. It's the wrong message. All this stuff has got to go because it gets in the way. Later he would point out it's in the court of the Gentiles where they had this bazaar set up. The place where non-Jews ought to most freely be welcomed, and there's no room. There's all this other stuff going on. Now get this other stuff out. Make room. Because that's the Father's heart. You know, when our boys were little, they knew. I mean, we weren't the most perfect parents. But we loved our kids, and they knew. They always knew they were loved. And sometimes they would work for money, you call it an allowance or whatever, and you wanted to teach them all the skills of life because they'd have to leave the Father's house, and then, they're going to want to build good, loving families of their own one day. So you try and teach them. You teach them to work for money, but we never had them work for food, work for water. We pointed out that, you're part of the family. You do get fed. You do have good things to drink. But, learn to, in love, cooperate and be a part of this whole thing. But it's not a business. It's not like, what's a fair price for this food? You need to do this much work before you get that much food. No, it was the house of loving parents. And for our kids, if they ever asked for food, they almost always got it. If they asked for bread, they didn't get a rock. If they asked for fish, they didn't get a snake. And they typically, even if they asked for a dessert, it would be wait, and you'll get it later. And even if they broke the rules, it never broke the relationship. We still love them. You're still our kids. And growing up in a family, I wish to God every one of you had grown up in a family like that. If you didn't, that's sad. I did. I grew up in a family like that. Jesus is trying to let us all know that's the heart of the Father. That's the house of your heavenly Father. Even when you break the rules, you didn't break the relationship. He still loves you. Lately, my little grandson Lincoln, he's 3 years old now already. Little baby Lincoln, he's 3 years old now. And Jonathan gets to work from home, and he works a really tough, long-hour type job, but at least he's in the home. And he was telling me the other day that he was there, and he was gone in the other room to do some stuff, and he could hear Lincoln running across the house, and Lincoln said, "I didn't do a no-no." And Johnson was like, "Oh, what no-no didn't you do?" "I didn't do a no-no in the kitchen." "Well, let's go in the kitchen and see what no-no you didn't do in the kitchen." He gets in there, he says, I didn't do a no-no with the cereal. And he says, "Lincoln, did you eat some cereal?" "Well, just a little bit." So Jonathan, of course, took him outside, beat the tar out of him, and said, "Until you learn to work the way I have to work from home, you're not coming back in and eating another thing." Now, it's just, you learn. You broke the rules. You learn. You tried to be deceitful. Thank God you're not very good at it yet. The temptation was too much for you. A couple of days later, he was saying that he saw Lincoln come into his office, there, and he's got brown stuff all over his face. And Jonathan's on an important business call, and he looks at him with brown stuff, and he's like, and Lincoln's like, and so he finally gets off the phone. It's like, he goes through that whole sequence again and finds that Lincoln found where the M&Ms are, in the freezer, and got them. So Jonathan's telling me these stories, and I said, "You know what? I think it was about this age, when you were about 3 years old, that we decided we needed to put a bungee cord around the refrigerator." And our friends would come over and go, "Why you got a bungee cord around your refrigerator?" We'd point, there he is. It's like, he's a good kid, it's just the temptation's too much. And so even if you break the rules, you don't break the relationship. When it comes to your heavenly Father, even if you break the rules, even if you break his heart, he's still going to run to receive you the moment you come to your senses and say, "I know where my home is. I'm going home." He doesn't wait for you to come up with a good speech like the prodigal son tried to do. No, he just runs to receive you. And Jesus wants us to know that. And so his disciples remembered, it says there in verse 17, they remembered that it was written, passion, zeal, fiery, flaming passion for your house will just burn me up. They saw that passion, but they didn't get it. It says they remembered it. Like most everything else, for them, for us, later on, maybe, hopefully you remember, and you go, "Oh, that's what it was." But one thing they saw for sure, he is really hot. He is worked up about this one. This is important to him. They saw his passion, and it wouldn't be until later when they saw his passion going to the cross as the Lamb of God. It wasn't until later, after he was risen from the dead, that they'd reflect back and they'd say, that's what it's about. That's why he took it so personally. Because he was the person who was making the way. He was the ladder. He was the bridge. He's Bethel. He's the way we get to see what the Father's like. His disciples remembered this, and it says, verse 18, the Jews therefore answered and said to him, "What sign do you show to us, seeing that you do these things?" And Jesus answered and said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now he knew they wouldn't know what he was talking about, but he said it anyway. They want a sign, but what good are signs when you are blind? Until you taste, you can't see. And back to the first sign, the turning of water to wine, that's taste and see the Lord is good. And so his house should always be a place where you're received. Even if you're not good, he's still good. And his love still flows. And so he makes it clear, and we'll go back and look more and more. We'll see. He's the meeting place. He's the ladder. He's Bethel. It's not a building, it's a person. That's why he took it so personally. So his disciples saw it more than most of us. Sometimes we think, if I'd been there, or seeing is believing. No, it's not the way it works. Taste and see. The Lord, he's good. They saw his passion, but they really didn't understand yet. Some people have a passion for purity. They're very religious people. They're the very ones that would put Jesus to the cross. They're the very people today who, for the sake of trying to clean up their denomination or clean up their congregation, they'll say, you're not pure enough. You don't fit with our system. Everyone's got their game. Everyone's got their categories, their rules. But Jesus, his passion isn't for purity. His passion is for people. And if there's something wrong with you, let me help you. If there's a stain, let me take it away. If you're weary and heavy laden, just come. His passion for people. You'll see it in his passion at the cross. How much does he love you, like we sang earlier? How wide, how long, how deep, how high? How much does he love you? How much does he want you? Think about that.
Lord, in your name I'm not afraid. You have been my hope when fears were far beyond my understanding. And in your name I'm not alone. You have been my help when friends were far beyond my reach. So in your name I'll face the unknown eyes before me. And in your name I'll sing a song of victories won. And in your name I'll keep repeating what you told me. That in the end I'll not regret the way we've come. Living in your name, I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. Living in your name, I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. Lord, in your name I'm not afraid. You have been my hope when fears were far beyond my understanding. And in your name I'm not alone. You have been my help when friends were far beyond my reach. So in your name I'll face the unknown eyes before me. And in your name I'll sing a song of victories won. And in your name I'll keep repeating what you told me. That in the end I'll not regret the way we've come. So in your name I'll face the unknown eyes before me. And in your name I'll sing a song of victories won. living in your name.